So I'm going to start with a scenario that a lot of us might have experienced or know someone that has been through something similar. This is the story of Martin and Jen. So this is Martin, this is Jen, and Martin and Jen met in the first year of their undergrad, and a few months go by and they become really, really close friends. Now, Martin starts to fall in love with Jen. And unfortunately for him, Jen didn't feel the same way about him. Not her fault, she just simply thought of him as a friend. However, that really devastated Martin. And that's because the person he loves and cares for so much doesn't feel the same way about him, at least romantically. Now, my question is, how many of you have been through something similar or know someone that's been through something similar? Yeah, a lot of us, right? Now, if you've been through something similar, you know how annoying it is. And not being able to get over it for such a long time just bothers you so much. And the more and more you think about it, it just boggles you even more. Now, luckily, if we understand how the brain works in these situations, we can understand why it's so difficult and maybe gain some insight as to how we could deal with such a situation if we're ever in it. So, I really love music, and I'm actually a really big Coldplay fan. So, on my way to school once, I was listening to Hymn for the Weekend by Coldplay, and I came across the line in the song, "Life is a drink and love is a drug." And if you're like me, you're probably thinking, to what extent is that true? Well, imagine that this is the brain of someone who's in love. When someone's in love, dopamine, serotonin, and epinephrines are all being dumped into the brain by the boatloads, right? What that does is basically, it'll increase your heart rate, give you a bunch of butterflies in your stomach, and it'll also work on your reward systems in the brain to make you feel happy. Now, what's really interesting is that these same hormones and neurotransmitters are the same ones being dumped into the brain of someone who's addicted to a hard drug, like cocaine or heroin. And essentially, two things happen when these hormones or neurotransmitters are being in the brain. First, you get an intense or continuous feeling of euphoria, which makes you feel like you're on top of the world, or you always have a positive outlook on life. And the second thing, which is unfortunate, is that you become emotionally attached to that thing, because that thing is the cause for your body to manufacture these neurotransmitters and hormones, and essentially you perceive it as essential for living. You need it for your happiness. Now, for Martin, the uncertainty and the absence of Jen has neurophysiological manifestations that are quite similar to someone who's going through drug withdrawal. For instance, he'll have negative moods, so he'll be irritable, anxious, or even go through depression, feelings of emptiness. He won't be able to sleep at night sometimes, and his mind is going to be always occupied by thinking about his problem. And all of these things culminate into that horrible feeling we get whenever we get rejected. Now, we can apply this to classical conditioning. So if we think about the love effects like euphoria as an unconditional stimulus, that could elicit an involuntary compensatory response. And over time, these places where you used to hang out can also become associated with these love effects. And essentially, even without that person being there, they could elicit that same compensatory response, which can be the reason why you feel down or sad whenever you think about the person. So that tells us a couple of things. It tells us that love can be thought of as a drug, technically. And basically, that means that Coldplay lyrics are actually quite accurate. And also tells us that someone can actually get addicted to love. Now, that gives us a lot of insight, because if we are addicted to love, then we can go through the same exact procedures that someone who's addicted to an actual drug goes through in rehab to get better. So removing all cues and reminders of the person, that could help you get rid of these negative emotions. So if you're ever in a situation like Martin's, think like a scientist and you'll get through it. Thank you.